Flamethrower Black Ops. The flamethrower in Black Ops 1 is a weapon that sounds like pure chaos incarnate. Spray fire, clear rooms, roast enemies in cinematic fashion. In theory, it's terrifying. In reality, it's a walking death sentence. Sprinting around with a flamethrower instantly makes you a target. SMGs, assault rifles, pistols, anything with range or mobility will melt you faster than your weapon melts the air. Close the distance, and your effective range is laughably short. Miss a shot, that was it. Open maps are a death trap. Hallways offer slightly better odds, and medium-range engagements are basically unwinnable. Ammo is another glaring issue. The flamethrower runs out fast, leaving you with little more than a glorified melee weapon once your fuel is gone. Then there's Flak Jacket Pro, which turns the flamethrower from bad to laughably worse. Enemies with this perk are 95% immune to fire-based attacks. Half the lobby is actively trolling your attempts at dominance while you're trying to roast someone who can casually walk through fire like it's a Sunday stroll. A weapon that already struggles to justify its existence becomes utterly useless against anyone remotely prepared. Competitive players never touched it, and even casuals learned fast that winning with the flamethrower required luck, perfect positioning, and enemies who were asleep at the wheel. In short, the BO1 flamethrower was more meme than weapon. Fun in theory, hilarious to watch, and utterly brutal to use in actual multiplayer. Flak Jacket Pro ensured that, even if you somehow got close, half the lobby could completely ignore your fire. Equip it, and you weren't just risking your life, you were signing up for public humiliation in every lobby. The flamethrower perfectly embodies the worst kind of COD attachment. Flashy, seemingly fun, and utterly terrible in practice. Scrambler, Call of Duty Ghosts. The Scrambler was a unique attachment exclusive to the Riot Shield, designed to be a tactical tool. Its passive effect scrambled the minimap of any enemy who got too close, theoretically giving you a stealthy advantage while advancing. In reality, it was one of the worst attachments in the franchise. Its effective range was pitifully short, requiring you to be practically on top of an enemy for the effect to trigger. To make matters worse, the scrambled minimap was a glaring signal that a shield user, and therefore a likely easy target, was right nearby. Many players also ran the cold-blooded perk, which made them completely immune to its effect. Players quickly realized it was more of a liability than an asset. On paper, it sounded useful for flanking, but in practice, it acted as a beacon that gave away your position. Forums filled with jokes about how the Scrambler was actually scrambling your own team's chances of winning. Ghost's Scrambler is remembered as an attachment that punished any attempt to use it creatively. The only thing it rewarded was your enemy's awareness by loudly announcing your approach. Upgraded iron sights. Black Ops tried to improve handgun iron sights with the upgraded iron sights attachment, giving slightly clearer visuals and minor reticle tweaks. The issue was iron sights were already perfectly functional. What you got in return was a wasted attachment slot and no meaningful advantage. It didn't increase accuracy, didn't reduce recoil, and didn't help with target acquisition in any meaningful way. The community reaction was merciless. Players joked that it was a visual placebo, and mocked Treyarch for thinking anyone would ever sacrifice grip for slightly prettier irons. Upgraded iron sights is a classic example of an attachment that exists purely to fill a menu option, rather than improve gameplay. It's a lesson in cosmetic over function. Flashy in theory, useless in practice. Heartbeat sensor, multiple games. The heartbeat sensor promises instant intel, but in practice it's mostly useless. Sprinting players and chaotic lobbies make the pings irrelevant. By the time you see an enemy, they're already around a corner, ADSing or throwing a grenade. In mid-range it was often redundant. In close range it was even more useless. New players see it in the menu and think they're tactical geniuses, only to realize it slows them down and encourages camping. Competitive players ignore it, while public lobbies have turned it into a meme for anyone who can't aim or move at the same time. In short, the heartbeat sensor looks useful, but it rarely changes a fight. Equip it, and you're trading a tactical slot for false confidence. A classic menu looks cool. Lobby says no attachment. Bipod, Modern Warfare 3. The bipod in Modern Warfare 3 is one of those attachments that sounded brilliant in theory but completely fell apart in practice. The idea was simple. Mount your LMG, reduce recoil, and turn your gun into a laser beam. Except MW3 wasn't a game built for camping. Maps were small, chaotic, and fast-paced. Players were sprinting around corners, tossing grenades, and spamming UAVs. In that environment, trying to find a spot to set up a bipod was like trying to have a tea party in the middle of a tornado. Even when you did find a spot, deploying the bipod was clunky. You had to be prone or on a ledge, and even then, the game didn't always cooperate. Sometimes it wouldn't deploy at all, leaving you staring at your gun like it personally betrayed you. And when it finally did lock in, congratulations, you were now completely immobile. Sure, your recoil disappeared, but so did your ability to dodge incoming grenades, flankers, or an enemy sprinting straight at you. In a game where speed and positioning mattered more than anything, being rooted to the ground was basically a death sentence. LMGs in MW3 didn't even need this attachment. They were already accurate enough to shred enemies without a bipod, and perks like steady aim and sleight of hand encouraged movement and aggression. Attaching a bipod wasn't maximizing your weapon, it was intentionally handicapping yourself. You traded mobility, map control, and survivability for slightly better recoil while standing or lying in one place. It was a classic realism over fun mistake. Ultimately, the bipod is remembered not as a useful tool, but as one of the worst attachments in COD history. It promised precision and control but delivered frustration and vulnerability. In a franchise built on speed, aggression, and constant movement, the bipod was the exact opposite, a stationary liability that turned serious players into sitting ducks. FlashGuard, Modern Warfare 2019. Here's an attachment that exists purely for people who don't read the fine print. The FlashGuard is one of those muzzles that sounds cool in theory, reduces muzzle flash. Nice, right? Except in practice, muzzle flash is almost never what gives your position away. Enemies already see your red dot on the minimap if you aren't suppressed, and even if they don't, your massive neon character model sprinting around corners is a bigger giveaway than some sparks at the end of your barrel. But it gets worse, because FlashGuard doesn't just do nothing, it actively makes your gun worse. In Modern Warfare 2019 and Warzone, equipping it reduced bullet velocity. That means your bullets traveled slower, which meant worse hit detection, more damage drop-off, and more situations where you'd swear you hit someone but the game politely told you nah, all for the privilege of slightly less screen shake when you fire. The community's reaction was unanimous. This thing was bait. If you ran it, you were essentially trolling yourself. In a game where every metagun needed bullet velocity stacked to the max, nobody in their right mind chose an attachment that lowered it. FlashGuard is a textbook case of looks cool in the menu, ruins your life in the lobby. Foregrip, Black Ops 2. The infamous foregrip in Black Ops 2. The attachment that promised universal recoil reduction and became the placebo of the year. Historically, grips were supposed to stabilize guns. ARs jittered less, SMGs kicked less. Everyone was happy. So when Treyarch released BO2, the foregrip was hyped as essential. Everyone expected this to be a game changer, a must-have for sweaty lobbies. Except tests showed it barely did anything. Players analyzed recoil frame by frame, comparing guns with and without the grip, and discovered that the effect was negligible, in some cases non-existent. This led to a hilarious backlash. The foregrip became the ultimate example of giving up a genuinely useful attachment like fast mags, stock, or long barrel for something that existed purely to make you feel like you had control. In the community, it became known for reducing emotional recoil rather than actual recoil, a savage joke at Treyarch's expense. The foregrip's failure wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Players felt empowered equipping it, imagining tighter sprays and cleaner bursts, only to find the difference imperceptible. Forums erupted with memes, videos, and tutorials highlighting the placebo effect. Over time, the foregrip became a badge of wasted potential, proof that even in a series obsessed with attachments, some ideas are better left on the drawing board. In BO2, the foregrip wasn't just bad, it was a scam. Rapid fire, across multiple games. Rapid fire is a classic attachment with a dangerous personality. With a low rate of fire weapons, it's a godsend. It increases your fire rate, letting you shred enemies faster and dominate close-range fights. But on an already high rate of fire gun, it's a nightmare waiting to happen. Black Ops 2 was the prime example. Adding rapid fire to a fast SMG turned what should have been a precise killing machine into a spray-and-pray disaster. Recoil skyrocketed, accuracy plummeted, and the mag emptied in seconds. Your time to kill didn't improve, you just respawned faster, which is not a win. In Warzone, the situation was worse. The high rate of fire guns already demanded careful ammo management. Rapid fire transformed your arsenal into a constant struggle to reload mid-fight. One moment you're in a squad push, the next you're completely dry after a single encounter. The attachment earned the nickname the turbocharger with no brakes. Fast, flashy, and inevitably disastrous if misused, the community learned to fear rapid fire. Its effectiveness was situational to the point of being comical. You didn't slap it on an SMG because it was universally good. You slapped it on a gun at your own risk. Tutorials and YouTube content often warned of its misuse, while Reddit threads documented the casualties of poorly chosen rapid-fire loadouts. In the hierarchy of COD traps, rapid fire is a textbook example of perfect on paper, devastating in reality. Grenade launcher underbarrel, MW3 and beyond. The noob tube has a storied history in COD. MW2 made it infamous, ruining lobbies and frustrating even casual players with its overpowered splash damage. Developers promised balance in MW3, but instead of fine-tuning, Infinity Ward swung the pendulum too far in the other direction, turning the underbarrel grenade launcher into a glorified ornament. Tiny splash radius, pathetic ammo capacity, and long swap animations made it all but useless. By the time you aimed, fired, and watched the grenade arc toward your enemy, they had already dispatched you with an ACR or similar weapon. Compared to carryable explosives like Semtex or C4, the launcher was a joke. Its reputation shifted from game-ruining weapon to dead weight, earning it a bizarre place in COD history. Community reaction went from rage to ridicule. MW2 players remembered the terror of the noob tube. MW3 players laughed at its impotence. Forums and videos mocked it mercilessly, and it became a symbol of an attachment's failure to adapt to gameplay needs. The underbarrel launcher illustrates an important lesson. Balancing an overpowered attachment by making it useless is hardly a solution. It's a dramatic swing into irrelevance, cementing its place in COD's Hall of Shame. FSS Predator Barrel, Modern Warfare 2019. The FSS Predator Barrel was Infinity Ward's idea of killing two birds with one stone, a barrel that had a built-in suppressor. On paper it sounded godly: one slot, two benefits. You free up space for other attachments while staying stealthy. Except the benefits were an illusion, because the Predator Barrel butchered everything that actually mattered in gameplay. Equipping it slashed your bullet velocity, reduced your effective damage range, and added sluggish handling. In Warzone, where velocity and range basically decided whether your bullets hit like paintballs or actual bullets, this barrel was a straight-up death sentence. Players who equipped it found themselves losing fights they should have won, not because they missed shots, but because the gun simply wasn't registering damage fast enough at range. It literally lost you gunfights by design. The community quickly figured it out. If you saw a Predator Barrel, you instantly knew the player was either experimenting, trolling, or brand new. Reddit and YouTube reviewers shredded it as one of the worst attachments in Warzone history. The dream of a 2-in-1 slot turned into a scam. Like buying a phone charger that works as a bottle opener but doesn't actually charge your phone. ZLR Deadfall Barrel. Modern Warfare 2019. If the Predator Barrel was bad, the ZLR Deadfall was its evil twin. This one slapped an integrated suppressor onto the FN SCAR 17, a gun that already struggled with handling. Again, the sales pitch was simple: get suppression without needing to waste a muzzle slot. But the reality was a masterclass in how to ruin an assault rifle. The Deadfall tanked your mobility, slowed your ADS time, and most importantly, nuked the SCAR's already limited bullet velocity. You took a gun that needed help keeping up with the M4A1 and Kilo, and made it worse in every single measurable category. By equipping it, you basically agreed to play at a permanent disadvantage against anyone with a meta rifle. The COD community wasn't kind. People called it a self-nerf. It became an example of how Infinity Ward loved giving us attachments that pretended to offer flexibility but secretly kneecapped your gun. When even YouTubers dedicated to weird builds refused to touch it, you knew it was pure trash. FMJ Full Metal Jacket. Multiple games. FMJ. The attachment that tricked an entire generation of players. Full Metal Jacket sounded badass, looked badass, and promised badass results. More bullet penetration. And yes, it technically delivered. You could shoot through walls a little more effectively. But here's the kicker: it didn't actually increase base damage in most games. You weren't killing faster. You weren't winning fights head-to-head. You were just better at wallbanging. The average player didn't care about wallbanging. They cared about dropping enemies faster. So what ended up happening was millions of players wasted an attachment slot on FMJ, thinking it made their gun stronger when in reality it barely mattered. The placebo was so strong that FMJ became a staple on noob setups. If you died to a guy using it, odds are he thought he was running extra damage bullets. In competitive play, FMJ was almost universally banned. Not because it was OP, but because it was useless for anything but wall cheese. And in public lobbies it became shorthand for "this guy doesn't know what he's doing." FMJ is proof that sometimes the most hated attachments aren't the ones that ruin balance, but the ones that waste your time by lying to you. Thermal scope, across multiple games. On paper, the thermal scope should have been one of the most powerful tools in COD history. Spot enemies through smoke, highlight them like neon signs, and dominate from range. And in very specific situations, like MW2's smoke spam lobbies, it was useful. But for the most part, the thermal scopes were a curse. The first problem was tunnel vision. Equipping thermal zoomed you in so much that your field of view shrank to a glorified keyhole. In fast-paced COD games, losing peripheral vision is basically signing your death warrant. Even worse, in most titles thermal didn't actually increase accuracy or time to kill. All it did was give you a flashy filter that made targets glow unless they were running cold-blooded or a similar perk. Suddenly, your god-tier scope turned into a glorified paperweight. The community reaction was brutal. Players called it a crutch for campers, and aggressive players hated how it punished movement. Competitive scenes either laughed it out of the room or straight up banned it. Unless you were cheesing smoke grenades, thermal scopes were less a tactical edge and more a handicap, the optical equivalent of playing with sunglasses indoors. Shotgun suppressor. Modern Warfare 2019 and beyond. Suppressors are usually amazing in COD. Stay off the radar, flank with confidence, win fights before the other team realizes what happened. But slap one on a shotgun. Congratulations, you've just taken the one thing that makes shotguns scary raw power and thrown it in the trash. In MW 2019, suppressed shotguns lost damage range so badly that your pump-action death machines suddenly needed 2 or even 3 shots to kill. And when you're already relying on one-hit kills in close quarters, that's basically game over. The worst part was nobody cared if a shotgun showed up on radar. By the time you blasted someone in the chest, they were already dead. The stealth factor was pointless. Players universally mocked this attachment. Forums were flooded with posts like, "Why would anyone ever run this?" And YouTubers roasted it as one of the dumbest design decisions in COD. The shotgun suppressor was the classic case of fixing a problem that didn't exist, and making the weapon completely unviable in the process. Laser sight, Black Ops 2. The laser sight in BO2 is a weird case. Technically it worked. It improved hipfire spread, letting you spray more effectively. The problem was what you gave up. In BO2, attachments like quick draw, stock, and fast mags were borderline mandatory if you wanted to keep up with the Sweatlords. Burning a slot on laser sight meant sacrificing real power for a gimmick. The result was that you looked like a clown. Not only did the glowing laser beam literally broadcast your position to enemies, free intel for them, free death for you, but the hipfire buff was marginal compared to just aiming down sights. Competitive players mocked anyone who used it. Public lobbies turned it into a joke attachment. It was basically a neon sign that said, "Yes, I'm bad at aiming." The laser sight became infamous for making you worse at the one thing COD is built around, that was gunfights. Instead of training your aim, it gave you a placebo spray buff while telling the entire map where you were hiding. Nobody respected it. Dual wield, Black Ops Cold War/other titles. Dual wield attachments are a gamble. In some CODs like MW2 with the Akimbo Rangers or BO1 with the dual wield Scorpions, they were broken. But when developers got paranoid and nerfed them too far, you got the other end of the spectrum. Completely unusable trash. Cold War is the poster child. Slap dual wield on a pair of pistols in Cold War and your accuracy instantly evaporated. No ADS, no precision, just two wildly flailing bullet hoses. You might delete someone at point blank if the stars aligned, but outside of melee range it was useless. The recoil patterns were erratic, reload times were awful, and you basically guaranteed that your gunfights became coin flips. The community quickly realized dual wield was either god-tier broken early Cold War diametus, looking at you, or absolute garbage. There was no in-between. And when Treyarch over-nerfed them, the attachment instantly went from sweaty meta to meme tier. Running dual wield in its bad phases wasn't just a handicap. It was public admission that you were role-playing as John Woo instead of trying to win. Hybrid Scope. Modern Warfare series. The Hybrid Scope was supposed to give players the best of both worlds. A red dot for close range, and a zoomed scope for long range. Sounds like a genius idea. Instead, it gave you the worst of both. The problem was switching between modes was clunky and slow. By the time you toggled from your red dot to your zoom, the gunfight was already over, and you were the loser. The zoom levels themselves were awkward too. The long-range view wasn't nearly as stable or clear as a dedicated scope, and the red dot wasn't as clean as a standard reflex sight. You basically sacrificed handling speed and screen clarity for the privilege of fumbling with a button mid-gunfight. Players universally mocked it. The hybrid scope showed up in worst attachments lists for years, with pros and casuals alike dunking on how impractical it was. Instead of versatility, you got indecision. It was COD's way of teaching players that sometimes, picking a lane is better than trying to do everything. ACOG Scope. Black Ops. The ACOG scope in Call of Duty Black Ops was a persistent letdown for the twitchy, close to medium-range gunfights that defined the multiplayer. While its 1.75x magnification promised precision for long-range engagements, the high zoom was fundamentally at odds with the typical combat distances on maps like Nuketown and Firing Range. It didn't offer the speed of the red dot sight or reflex sight for quickly snapping onto targets, and its higher magnification often made close-quarters battles a dizzying tunnel vision nightmare. The most detrimental effect of the ACOG was the reduction in center speed on most applicable weapons, which essentially meant it increased the recoil or slowed the speed at which your weapon centered itself between shots. This made controlling automatic weapons at range, the very role the ACOG was supposed to assist, significantly harder than simply using iron sights or a low-zoom optic. For weapons like the M16 or semi-automatic rifles like the M14, it could be situationally useful, offering a slight increase to the weapon's maximum damage range. However, for the majority of assault rifles and especially submachine guns, the ACOG was a wasted attachment slot, severely limiting versatility without offering a significant practical benefit to justify the trade-off. Players quickly realized that in a game prioritizing quick reaction times, sacrificing a more beneficial attachment like an extended mag or a suppressor for the ACOG's limited utility was a losing proposition. Dragunov Scope. Multiple game. If you ever wanted to experience what it feels like to fight your gun more than your enemies, this was the optic for you. Equipping it on weapons like the AS Val came with a brutal trade-off. You got high 8x magnification, but at the cost of a massive 22% reduction in aim-down sight speed. It made your rifle feel like it was wading through molasses. Couple that with awful visual clarity, thick black borders that ate up your screen, and a scope glint that announced your position to the entire map, and you had a recipe for frustration. The worst part was the games that featured this scope already had a ton of better optics available. Why anyone would run the Dragunov over a clean 3x or a standard sniper scope was a mystery. The only logical answer is that players were either grinding for camo challenges or just didn't know any better. Everyone else avoided it like the plague. Community sentiment was brutal, with players calling it a scope designed by someone who hates fun. Even in games often plagued by balance issues, the Dragunov scope managed to stand out as one of the most miserable attachments ever conceived. HAMR Scope. Modern Warfare 3. The HAMR scope is one of those attachments that looks impressive in a loadout screen but is an absolute nightmare in actual gameplay. MW3's SMGs were designed for close-range chaos, tight corners, fast strafing, and hipfire battles. Slapping a HAMR on one of these weapons turned it into a clunky, slow laser pointer. ADS time skyrocketed, handling worsened, and your precious mobility vanished. You were trying to combine a sniper-style optic with a gun meant for run-and-gun play, and the result was predictable: frustration. Community consensus was brutal. Forums and YouTube reviews mocked it as the optic that punished you for trying to aim. Even competitive players laughed at the HAMR's practicality. Its main legacy was proof that just because an optic exists doesn't mean it belongs on every gun. In short, the HAMR scope in MW3 was less an upgrade and more a punishment for overthinking loadouts. Bayonet World at War, Black Ops series. The bayonet attachment is a perfect example of developers forgetting what game they were making. Sure, in a gritty WW2 sim, slapping a knife on the end of your rifle makes sense. But in a twitchy FPS where everyone's sprinting around with SMGs and drop-shotting corners, the bayonet was basically cosplay. In World at War, equipping it didn't even meaningfully change your melee lunge speed. It just gave you a slightly longer poke range. Meanwhile, you gave up a far more useful attachment like dual mags or aperture sight. By the time you lunged at someone with your shiny bayonet, they'd already turned you into Swiss cheese with an MP40. Later CODs that tried to revive it, like Black Ops, had the same problem. The bayonet sounded badass in concept, but it was never practical in the run-and-gun chaos of multiplayer. The community quickly wrote it off as dead weight. It didn't even have the troll factor of Commando Pro lunges from MW2. It was just worse melee, welded to the end of your gun. Cool for the box art, useless in the actual lobbies. Oil Can Suppressor. Modern Warfare 2019. The oil can suppressor from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019 is universally regarded as one of the game's most glaring examples of a novelty attachment that was utterly non-viable in competitive play. While its inclusion was a humorous nod to the campaign's improvisational military gear, its in-game statistics made it a self-inflicted handicap that virtually no serious player would consider. The primary reason for its infamy was the sheer scope of its penalties, specifically its devastating impact on aim-down sight ADS speed. In a title where gunfight outcomes are decided by milliseconds of reaction time, the oil can inflicted a disproportionately high penalty that slowed the user to a crawl. This placed players at an immediate and significant disadvantage in nearly every engagement, especially when compared to the monolithic suppressor, which provided greater utility, increased damage range, and bullet velocity for a similar yet more manageable ADS trade-off. Furthermore, the attachment's massive, bulky design was not just visually unique, it was a functional impediment. When aiming down the weapon's iron sights, the oversized oil filter often completely blocked the player's view, making target acquisition and aiming impossible without adding an optic. This forced players to dedicate a second attachment slot to a sight, merely to overcome the oil can's physical obstruction, effectively wasting 2 of the 5 available slots just to achieve basic suppressed firing. The consensus was that the attachment existed purely for memeing builds and casual challenge runs. It offered zero statistical advantage to justify its crippling drawbacks, making it a symbolic representation of what not to use if victory was the objective.